Hey guys, and welcome to today's live stream. We're going to be talking about how you can use your core to protect your lower back if you've got a lower back problem. We're going to go through a few sort of simplicities around the back, how it works, how it goes wrong. One of the big mistakes a lot of people cover or often fall into when they do have some back trouble. And then towards the end of the live stream, we're going to go through what you should be doing so you can understand how to not fall into these traps and finish up with Q&A at the end. So if you guys have any questions, then do please post those in the comments below. That way we'll get to the question and answer at the end. Lara's the other side of the screen taking those down, so we will get to those at the end of today's live stream. With that being said, let's get into today's topic. So if you are new to the channel, please do consider subscribing. We do these live streams every single weekday, so you're welcome to join. If you hit the notification bell, you'll know when we go live. So with that out of the way, let's get into today's topic. The first thing I wanted to address, we've got some notes on the board behind as well for your reference, so you can better understand what I'm talking to with a few of those simplistic drawings there. But the first and foremost bit to cover is that the majority of lower back injuries, back pain essentially, the causes of that, and that includes sciatica as well, is caused by a compression of the spine. It's caused by excessive load repeatedly on a day in, day out basis, and made worse by perhaps inactivity or desk-based activities for extended periods of time, maybe not enough exercise. But it really is this axial compression. It's the compression through the spine to compress those structures that really creates trouble. And when that's done cumulatively, a relatively innocuous bending over to put the socks on in the morning can be the thing that sort of triggers the back to go. And without getting bogged down with too much detail, it's quite often the case, because of the way in which these sections in here, these discs are innervated, we don't really know too much about the way in which those discs are becoming damaged and degenerated until it starts to creep into the outer part of that disc, where things start to really prolapse or bulge or become strained, that our brain is made aware of the damage that's there, because the disc itself is very much an enclosed environment. It's sealed off in a big way, and the main way it gets its nutrients, etc., is through movement and compression and pressure gradients, drawing fluid in and out. And it's only when we reach a critical mass or critical momentum that we start to feel symptoms. And in the early days, this will start as back discomfort, aching, that sort of stuff. And often we kind of just get on with it. It's a bit of a nuisance, but that's pretty much it. It's very rare that it is that one-off incident. But what does happen, and this is the big mistake I wanted to cover with you guys on today's live stream, is that people will either, from an internal place, just take the initiative, or they'll maybe go to the doctor and they say, hey, you've got this going on, you've got a bit of back spasm there, go and do some core exercises. And people immediately go to those very first core exercises. They go and do some planks, they do some sit-ups, we'll do some Russian twists, we'll do some leg raises. All of these activities, and I'll break them down in a moment, that really serve to be that first port of call in making your back pain worse. And really, I'm not 100% sure where this has come from, but people just think core, they think six-pack, and they think sit-ups and planks and leg raises. And for whatever reason that is, we won't get into that. But fundamentally, have a look at what they're actually doing in your body, and it'll make you really realize that these are the last things that you possibly want to be doing if we have a injured or weakened or overstrained structure in that lower back. Now, in the first instance, as I mentioned at the start, it's the axial compression. It's the compression through the disc here and between the bones throughout the lumbar spine, and arguably through the whole thing. But the lumbar spine takes the most of its load. The vertebra and the discs and the bones are the biggest down there and the most support. But it's that compression through this spine, particularly the front part. And why is that? Because a lot of us spend a lot of time sat down. We're sat down in the office, we're sat down at home, we're watching TV, we're sat in the lounge, we're sat eating dinner, we're sat in the car. We sit for an inordinate amount of time on a daily basis, and we're not supposed to do that. It puts more pressure through our lumbar spine. Assuming we're sat perfectly, it puts more pressure through our lumbar spine, let alone if we're sat in an inappropriate position. So please do just take a mental note right now. How much time of the day, or what percentage of the daytime that you're awake and upright do you spend sat down in some position, slouching in the comfortable chairs or sat at the dinner table? Just take note, because it really is quite eye-opening when you really start to add those things up. Now, what's happening? Well, we should have a normal curve, and I'll get to this part, the purple part of the board a little bit later on, but we should have a nice lordosis through our lumbar spine, which allows neutral pressure through the front and the back portion of the vertebra. Remember, the front is primarily the load-bearing structure, and that's in that neutral position there. Now, what happens when we are putting extra pressure through the discs, maybe we're slouching, etc., is we're often in this position. The spine is very, very straight. It loses its ability to absorb shock. And if you think about it, it's that bend that allows the whole spine to deform under load and curve. If the spine is straight, imagine jumping off a small step with your legs locked out. It creates an awful amount of compression and injury through those joints, and you wouldn't do it twice. Yet with our spine, readily people will sit in this position for extended periods, loading on the same part of the spine, the same front part, the same discs, and then after a period of time it just starts to deform to the side like so. So if we know that forward bending, which we see time and time again in the clinic, in the clinic we do a lot of imaging work. We see the patient as they present to the clinic, but we also see their spine objectively rather than just sort of feeling it. We can see their spine and what's happening. In a lot of cases, the overwhelming majority of cases, we have a substantial reduction in the lumbar curve that goes alongside a back problem that is not getting better. Well, if we then go back to what I mentioned earlier about the first exercises we typically move towards, it's going to be the sit-up. What's that doing? More of this, but in a more severe way. So the exercise we first default to try and decrease the pressure on our spine and increase the support is one that serves to increase further pressure through the discs. Is that really the best idea? It's like saying you've got a sprained ankle and your rehab is going to be to hop on that ankle for 10 reps 3 times a day. It's not going to help those tissues recover, and it is going to make things worse in the long term, which can accelerate the wear and tear process through those discs. The other one, the leg raises. Well, often as we bring those legs up, people will compress the discs because they lift their bum off and flatten the lordosis more than when we're maybe sat down or and definitely standing. Or then maybe we've got some of those other ones, the Russian twists, and those are a forward bending position with rotation. If you've seen any of our other live streams, you'll know just how detrimental and challenging a Russian twist style activity is, especially if we've got damaged lumbar discs. And it's worth just pausing for a moment here to note that for those of you with otherwise healthy body, healthy spine, no back pain, etc., you're probably not the kind of person that's watching this video anyway, but a perfectly healthy individual with no issues in their lumbar spine will be able to get away with these activities, and that's perfectly fine, and they do have a place potentially. But I would also ask you, when there are so many other activities, so many other exercises that are safe and sensible to do, is it really worth choosing that particular exercise to get yourself or your core stronger? Because there is no doubt having a strong midsection and core, which we'll get onto as we start to move through the live stream, is going to be a help to your lumbar spine. It provides more stability, more protection. But there are a plethora of ways in which we can work the core effectively. And if we think about how that core works effectively in our body, we can use the right sort of exercises and avoid the wrong ones. So if we get into what we would suggest, neutral stability. We want to stabilize the spine. Think about the spine. When we look at it on an x-ray, we see there's this tiny little rod in the middle, and we've got a big rib cage and a big shoulder girdle, and then we've got a big pelvis and strong leg muscles, and we've just got this little stick in the middle that's supposed to be supporting the whole structure. Now, if you were helping a friend maybe put a ladder up against a wall, a tall ladder up against maybe they're going to clean the windows outside the house, what do you do to provide stability to that ladder? You don't bend forwards, you provide compression in a transverse plane across the disc, across the ladder, to hold it steady and stop it wobbling and provide a degree of stability. And that is what our core should be doing when we're doing some of these movements. The most strong position for your back to be in is going to have a neutral lordosis in its resting position, its neutral position. That is where we have a degree of curve through the spine. That is a very strong position for the spine to be in. And in order to put us in that position to lift, we need to have flexibility in other areas, etc. But our spine, our core muscles need to be engaged in that transverse plane across this disc to provide compression that way, so that the compression going through the spine doesn't cause a displacement of the discs here and cause them to bulge outwards. That is the best way for us to provide compression. And I often say to guys in the back in shape, I say, look, imagine you're wearing a corset. Maybe you're wearing your wife's corset, or maybe you're wearing your own corset, or whatever that may be. And someone's grabbed those strings at the back and pulled them really tight, and everything just goes in and just holds it all together. We all have these muscles. We've had them since we were born, or since before we were born, and they are there to provide stability to your lumbar spine, and learning to engage those is really important. That is something that we teach a little bit in the first part of the Back in Shape Phase 1 routine, but thinking about that, challenging those core muscles to maintain stability by doing specific exercises is what we would suggest you. That is how you protect your back using your core, by teaching it to maintain stability across the spine and then engaging in movements. And we use that through the Back in Shape program. You've got phase 1, which is learning to engage your core. And then phase 2, we're learning to engage the core, but do some movements. So the spine remains still, off weight bearing in most of that, off weight bearing. So we haven't got compression load as we start to move some of the legs, some of the limbs. And if, as many times we see people that are maybe in the early parts of Back in Shape, or they're in the clinic and they've just come in, they've just started, and they'll say, whoa, I can't do exercise. My back's too sore. I can't do exercise. But they'll be struggling around the house, loading the dishwasher, taking the laundry down the stairs. Maybe they've got some help. They'll be sat in the sofa for hours every day. And I talk about this in previous live streams. We have 168 hours in a week. We've got 24 hours in a day. Let's suppose you sleep 8 of them. You've got a good number of hours, 16 hours where we're upright. And maybe you've got a routine that's for 1 hour of that 16 hours that is good for you. It's really strange how people, and it just requires a paradigm shift to say, I'm not going to do these exercises because I'm a bit too sore right now. Instead, I'm going to sit on the sofa, or I'm going to go and empty the dishwasher, or I'm going to go and cook the meal. We need to kind of change this shift and say, actually, the only thing that's really going to provide stability and protection for our spine is our core muscles, are those midsection muscles, and learning to engage them properly. And therefore, people will often, and it's not all the time, but it is some time, and I think it's a significant enough portion of time to really mention this in the live stream, is that too many people will say, I'm not going to do those expert prescribed exercises that are safe and effective for my spine, that may well have a little bit of discomfort, but are prescribed. Instead, I'm going to go and do all these other activities at home around the house and struggle on with those because I'm too sore to do the back pain. It just doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. And when you start to talk about it in that vein, it really says, well, I've got to do those. Well, you've also got to do your rehab. And doing those is definitely going to make you worse, and doing that is definitely going to make you better. So it's about having a moment to just reflect and say, should I be doing these core exercises properly? And if you've had bad experiences in the past doing the wrong core exercises and made it worse over a period of time, then that may be why you're a bit reluctant to do some of these exercises. But the exercises, for example, those in the phase 2 that provide stability to the spine while we're lying on our back and moving one or the other of the legs in some way, shape or form, a small movement. If we can't even do that movement, providing transverse stability through our core to protect our spine, lying on our back with no load of gravity, what hope do you have of providing stability and protection for your lumbar spine when we're upright doing those other tasks of daily living, which are very, very simple? So if we can't move one leg lying on the floor, how on earth are we effectively going to be doing things upright? And that's a really important thing to bear in mind. Many of you guys watching this, maybe you've got back pain for a long period of time or had it for a long period of time, you're reluctant, but you know that you should be doing something. Sometimes these exercises are difficult, and most of that comes down to technique. If we cannot hold our spine still with this transverse compression through the spine and maintain stability through our spine while moving one leg, if that one leg moving is enough to cause our spine to start wobbling, we do not have enough or appropriate levels of strength and stability, and that needs work. And unfortunately, there's only one way to go through that, and that's doing those safe exercises slowly within a tolerable amount of discomfort and slowly making steady improvement. Maybe you can only do 1 rep. Maybe you can only do 1 rep of these exercises or 2 reps before it starts to become a little bit too much. Then we need to really reflect on our technique, maybe watch some of the videos that help us understand how to do these exercises. But we need to then go back and practice them and practice them and practice them. And slowly with time, we've seen more than enough people go through this process with some with significant damage in their spine, some with not significant damage in their spine, relatively speaking. And they can all get through this process. It just requires a little bit of time. And if you haven't done these things properly, if you've been guilty of doing these sorts of sit-ups and planks, which aren't even working in many cases the right muscles, then we will struggle with these. It's like learning to play tennis with your left hand if you're right-handed, or learning to paint inside the lines with your left hand if you're right-handed. It takes time, but it does require consistency. And to the degree strengthening your core is a challenge, technically and physically, really indicates how much work you actually need to do and how much time you actually need to invest in these sorts of things, because it's the only way to really protect your lower back for the long term. We can do treatments, and in the clinic we have fantastic treatments that really help these things, but unless you strengthen up your own body and your own protection, which every single one of you watching this video has, you really will always be at risk of falling foul of just circumstance and having an inappropriate support to protect that lumbar spine. So That's pretty much it for me. I hope that's been interesting and helpful. I know it's not been through specific action points or exercises to do. I've covered a few conceptual things there. The reason we cover these concepts is because if I just said do this exercise, you'd say I did that and it was sore, and you wouldn't have the conceptual understanding behind it to understand that that may actually be okay. So that's the purpose of these live streams. We have a whole Back in Shape for phase 1, which is free to join. We've got phase 2 and phase 3, which is a monthly membership. All of the exercises are there and how to do them, etc. So there's plenty of information out there on the specifics, but the purpose of this live stream today was to have a chat with you guys and give you guys some understandings, some principles that are applicable across the board rather than one specific exercise without the understanding. So hopefully that's been helpful, and we'll get into Q&A.
Okay, awesome. Good morning, everybody. Yes, so you can get involved by and joining for free by going to www.backinshapeapp.com. I have put the link in the description. Okay, brilliant. Kate said great analogy with the ladder.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, you see the guys, putting up scaffolding all over the place, and you have to hold and stabilize, and it's across the structure. We provide that stability, and it's very, very important.
Yeah. Karen asked here, does running help with strengthening the core? Should you run with your core engaged?
So you should have a degree of passive tone in your core, and to be honest, you can't really run without your core engaged, or can't run well without your core engaged, because you need that core to actually provide. Basically, your leg muscles are powerful. They're only anchored onto your spine. So if you don't have a stable core for it to wiggle and move off, then you're going to really struggle. So having a good, strong core is going to help you with your running. What was the first part of that question, Lara? Because there was something specific that I was going to touch on.
Does running help with strengthening the core?
Okay, so running will help to a degree, but running will help the healthy person get stronger. I wouldn't suggest if we have back trouble that running is necessarily the first port of call to get into. It can often be a bit challenging for many. So maybe leave that out. That's something that I generally say to people after we've got to phase 3, and through phase 3 we can start feeding and running. And I know there's a few guys in the Back in Shape that have a desire to do that and have moved into that sphere. So that's okay. But I wouldn't say running is something to do to start with. And you will need a strong core. If you look at every single one on that Olympic track, they've all got a pretty strong, stable core, and it's very, very efficient. So running has numerous benefits, but when it comes to back pain, it's not the right time or place.
Okay, brilliant. And yes, please keep your questions coming in on Facebook. I'm going to jump over to YouTube. Margaret has asked here, I have a flat spine when laying down. Should I be lifting my back to form this curve when engaging the core? I use a small towel at the moment, but should I arch slightly to produce a curve? That's a really good question.
The big problem with our spines is that we cannot move individual joints. This is one of the really interesting bits. You don't have control over your L4-5. Let's just suppose it's L4-5 that's in trouble. You don't have individual control. You can't arch L4-5. All you'll end up doing when you try and arch yourself is produce bend wherever it'll go, and generally wherever it will go is probably where you didn't want it to go, that's already bending well. So it doesn't really help with the stiffness or rigidity that's not moving appropriately. So what is better is to use the towel and maybe build up to a slightly larger towel. But anyone and I have no idea how tall you are, but anyone that is really sort of 5'9"-ish, 5'9" to 6 foot, shouldn't really be considering making a beach towel any larger. There's no need. So we normally say a beach or bath towel, relatively large, rolled up. You guys have seen the exercise, the size of towel that I use. Anything that size for the overwhelming majority of people, unless you're sort of 4 foot or under 5 foot, then you might need a slightly smaller one. But work up to a normal size towel, and that should do the job for providing the arch. Now, some people in the phase 2, the early parts of phase 2, sometimes benefit from using that towel just while they're doing some of those exercises as well to provide a little bit of support. And definitely in the phase 1 exercise, things like the psoas engagement and the core activation exercise, for those people also benefit from using maybe a slightly smaller towel just to provide the arch. Remember, the arch shouldn't be ridiculous. When we're doing the exercises, not the towel exercise, but the actual strengthening exercises, a little bit of support is fine. We shouldn't have a massive gap like that big underneath our back, but we should have a very notable contact point on our bum and a very notable contact point on our lower thoracic spine where your bra strap is, and then there should be less pressure in that section there. And we all have different anatomy, we all have different fat tissue, muscle tissue, etc. And that will also come into play as to whether there is a notable arch or a slightly less notable arch there.
And when you are doing the core strengthening, are you looking to strengthen so much that you're flattening your lordosis, pushing your spine into
So when you're doing every single one of the core exercises, you should not be flattening. You should not be flattening your spine in any direction. I know there's a lot of confusion there sometimes with regards to exercises in Pilates and exercises in yoga. Without going down a rabbit hole, those are taught that way to stop you doing something else at the opposite end. And what we're supposing is actually, why don't you just learn to do it properly rather than trying to cheat your way into some of these reps? Do it properly, and that way you've got real stability, because there's no circumstances where doing that posterior tuck, that flattening your arch, is favorable, none whatsoever, and definitely not anything load bearing or lifting. The last thing you do is that sort of movement if you were going to lift a heavy weight. That would be a very bad idea. So I know why it's taught, but at the same time I have no idea why it's taught, because it's not helping your stability in your lumbar spine in a way that is applicable. That's the unique thing about Back in Shape. We're doing all these things and teaching you in these steps to make sure it's applicable for the long term. It's no good you learning a cheating way to engage your core in phase 1 that you're going to have to unlearn in phase 2 and phase 3, because that's just teaching you a pointless thing. It's a waste of time. Why bother?
Okay, awesome. Margaret said really helpful. Thank you. Ollie has asked here, when we are sat down, is there more pressure on our lower back when we've got our legs up or our legs down?
So even if you're sat in a neutral position, in a good position in the lumbar spine, sort of good, you're going to find there's around about 20% more pressure through the discs. If you've got very inflexible hamstrings, and for most people, even if you haven't, if you're sitting with your legs up, that is going to be tremendously worse. You're going to be exacerbating this thing here, this compression through particularly your L4-5 and L5-S1 discs much more, because of the act of tucking the sacrum under, tucking the bum under when we lift those legs up. This is the exact reason why, in opposite, often those kneeling chairs are quite good for people with back pain, because it stops the legs having to come up as much and therefore helps you maintain a sort of closer to neutral position in your lumbar spine. So that's why kneeling chairs are actually quite good, because they kind of you drop off.
Okay, brilliant. Joe's asked here, what are your thoughts on support belts that act like a corset for the spine?
The ones that if we just quickly take the other variation, the weightlifting belt, do not use those. There's absolutely no need, unless you're an Olympic powerlifter and you're looking to go to the World Championships or the Olympics. Do not bother with weightlifting belts. You're not lifting enough weight. I really find it difficult to watch when you see someone walking around the gym with a weightlifting belt on and they're doing bicep curls. It's misguided in so many ways, but that's just something that we have to try and put up with and try and help people understand. When it comes to the more broad reaching sort of corset type straps that Joe's referring to there, those belts, they're doing the job of your core, and where muscle, if you don't use it, you lose it. And that's basically where we need to go with that. Having these sorts of supports will be helpful in very, very extreme circumstances, but the average person, the overwhelming majority of back pain sufferers, will not require them, will not want to be using them, and it will be a bad idea to use those.
Okay, awesome. And Kate said very helpful. It does take time and lots of determination and accepting that we should take responsibility for ourselves to get strong, with the brilliant advice. So thank you.
Thanks, Kate. And just on that topic, it's the problem with back pain is you don't know you've done it straight away. And like I mentioned earlier, just in a little bit more detail, if we've got the disc here, you've got obviously the nucleus in the middle. You don't really know what's happening until things start to damage in this outer part of the disc. So you're inadvertently damaging yourself. It's like if you one of the big problems is when people have peripheral neuropathy. Peripheral neuropathy, this is a big tangent, but it will make sense, I assure you. Peripheral neuropathy is a problem where we lose the sensation to our fingers because of, in a lot of cases it's linked to diabetes, but other things as well. We don't have feeling in the fingers. So if you were just banging your finger with a hammer, you'd be basically crushing the bones and creating problems. But if you can't feel it, you wouldn't think that's a problem. Now, the good thing about that is you can actually look look up, and there are some serious conditions where people actually, it's very, very rare, but do not have this nociceptive sensation in certain parts of their body. And their life expectancy is very short because you don't have the fundamental mechanism for understanding that there's damage and that you're causing serious damage to parts of your body. So with diabetic neuropathy, you don't know that you've actually damaged this part of your fingers until you pick your hand up and you look at it and go, I need to stop banging my hand with a nail or slamming my finger in the door. And you can stop that action very quickly, even though you can't feel it maybe properly. And I'm talking about the extreme cases. Well, in the case of the lower back, you can't necessarily feel that you're causing damage for quite some time. So you build up you build down your core stability because you're inactive. Since maybe you were a teenager, you stopped doing activity, we got into life and cracked on and we were too busy. And you're not aware that the sitting for extended periods of time is causing repetitive stress through those discs and starting to create damage as it's creeping out to the point where we start to feel it. So by the time that repetitive strain cause of back pain starts to hit your consciousness as actual back pain, we've had a lot of time to build in some really bad practices that we simply weren't aware of. People might tell you, hey, sit up straight. And you go, yeah, whatever, I'll do it for 5 minutes. And then you stop. But we had so much time to build up these bad habits that then the expectation is, well, my back's only started hurting for the last 3 months. And we're thinking, well, yeah, but you've been doing these bad things for the last 6 years. Is it really going to resolve? Are you really going to be able to get rid of all these bad habits, bad movement patterns, things that we do on a daily basis and build those muscles back up? In the case of a few weeks, it's not going to happen. And that's quite often why people relapse, because they do a bit of work, they start feeling better again, but they don't address all of those underlying issues. Their core isn't as strong as it should be, and neither are the other muscles, and the habits haven't been eliminated effectively. That's why we also put that information in the Back in Shape right at phase 1 to help teach you guys. But the really interesting thing is we can see how much of all of the Back in Shape people watch, people look through, and how long they spend on each of those notes. And the unfortunate thing is, I'd say at least 50% of people just skip straight through those lessons and get straight to the exercises. And they don't benefit from all that other information, which is really upsetting, because they're going to come back to it sooner or later because they're just trying to work on one small facet of a problem that actually has been going on for a lot longer than one would expect. So that's quite frustrating. And we see that sometimes when people go through the program and then they're still doing things that phase 1, lesson 1 said stop doing this, and they're still doing them. And that's a real, it's upsetting, but the sooner we figure that out, it happens. Yeah.
Okay, I'll jump over to YouTube just after this one question. Cheryl has asked, will the exercises help with SIJ problems too?
What I would say for Cheryl is we did a couple of rather detailed live streams on the sacroiliac joint. So I definitely check those out. One of the big problems with this posture up here is that it actually opens out the sacroiliac joints and makes them more mobile than they maybe should be, especially for weight bearing. So with regards to sacroiliac joint problems, that you won't really get a primary sacroiliac joint problem unless you've had some sort of massive severe trauma, and in which case it's highly unlikely that you've managed to injure the sacroiliac and not the lumbar spine. So the sacroiliac is intimately related with the lumbar spine, its function and its structure, and the way in which it is or is not supported. So I definitely go and check that one out. YouTube will be the easiest place to find that.
Okay, right. So I will jump over to YouTube now. So Robin said, further to the sitting question, what about a footstool? Is this okay?
It would be the same. You're going to have the same issue. Do you have appropriate hamstring flexibility to use the footstool effectively? Yes, the footstool may be lower, but it's still going to be up on the chair. So, it's comfortable, don't get me wrong. But maybe what might work better is considering, is my flexibility there first, but also using a little rolled up towel underneath the lumbar spine. That will force your spine to stay closer to this position compared to this position. So that little rolled up towel, the base of our lumbar spine, right in this part here, not at the bottom behind your bum, but actually just in here in the arch. That will work a little bit better, but I definitely stay tuned, because we have, I think it's on 28th today, so on the 30th, the flexibility program is coming out, and you'll find that when you go through that process and make some measurable change in your hamstring flexibility, which is one of the main focuses of the program, you'll find that sitting in those sorts of positions will be much easier, and you'll find that it won't exert so much backward pressure and this happening when we're sitting with our legs up. A lot of people just don't have the flexibility in their hamstrings to sit up like that, and it pulls on the back. And even if they do, they kind of relax into it.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Matt on YouTube has asked here, do weighted squats with good form help to strengthen the core correctly for protecting the lumbar spine, or does it risk compression and further damage?
So
Weighted squats.
yeah, one of the things we talk about a lot in the early parts again, if this is in that information, is right thing, wrong time, or right thing, right time. It depends on where you are with regards to your back discomfort. If you're in a position where you've moved past phase 3, then I would say definitely the slow introduction of weighted squats is going to be a good thing. Why? Our body adapts to that. As you have, so one of the things we haven't necessarily covered as much, so I think we may have covered it in osteoporosis, but as you have more load going through the spine, the bones literally get stronger. You get more trabecular formations or more solid trabecular formations, and those are basically little basically lines of bone that transmit force, and you can see these on an x-ray when you really zoom in, the actual lines where we've got extra calcium laid down along regularly used force transference channels. So the use of squats with good form, once you've been through the necessary process and built up the appropriate other aspects of your back, flexibility, etc., and squats within the right flexibility, don't try and go too low because you're going to tuck your bum under and that's going to be a problem. But good squats, weighted squats, will be helpful in strengthening up these structures. Your body will adapt to the load. It's going to lay down more collagen, more bone, etc. The tendons are going to get stronger, the muscles are going to get stronger, and you will increase the overall strength and durability and resilience of your back. So weighted squats are 100% an appropriate activity, but not in phase 1 or phase 2.
Okay, awesome. That's great.
And we need to be sensible with the loading. Often people will then get too carried away maybe and go too far too fast, and that creates challenges in of itself.
Okay, brilliant. I think that is everything for today. So thanks everyone for your questions. That was great. Awesome.
And Cheryl, we'll try and find that sacroiliac joint video and just put it in the premium member Facebook group, because I think that's a useful video. We went into quite a lot of detail on that one, so It should be interesting for you. Awesome. Well, that's pretty much it today then. Thanks so much for joining us, guys, on today's live stream. Hopefully you found it really, really interesting. Some really good questions there as well. Do remember, if you are in the Premium Back in Shape, we have the flexibility protocol coming out literally in 2 days time. So that's going to be really, really cool and really something to work into your program, but not if you're in the early parts of phase 1, phase 2. Please get yourself up towards phase 3 before you start adding in the flexibility. We explain why in the program. You're happy to watch it, but don't get involved just until you're ready for it. Timing is everything. As I mentioned in that last question, right thing, wrong time, right thing, right time. We have to get the timing of these things right in our recovery process. We do the wrong things, we're going to relapse. So please watch out for that. Thanks so much for joining us, guys. We will see you guys tomorrow with another live stream. Thanks so much for joining us on today's video. Hopefully you found it packed full of useful information. If you want to learn more about the Premium Back in Shape membership, there's going to be a video somewhere underneath here. And if you want to stay up to date or tune into some of our more recent live streams and the Q&As at the end of those, then that's going to be down here. And remember, you can subscribe to the channel up here and hit the notification bell to make sure you know when we next go live, so you can join us for our next live stream and Q&A.